Good evening, everybody. You're well practiced. We're approaching panto season, so you've got that down, which is good. First of all, can everyone hear me okay? Wonderful. Well, thank you so very much for being here today. My name is Ellie. I'm the owner of the Trouble Club, and it is a delight to welcome you to our headline event this evening here in Croydon. Thank you all so much for coming out this Friday evening. It's very wet and dreary, so we really appreciate it. Put your hand up if this is your first Trouble event. It's not going to be your last. We do these literally every single week. Look at the schedules, see what's coming up. We are all about brilliant women off stage and brilliant women on stage, so please do see what else is coming up. This room is full of our members. It's an amazing community. And I should say as well, this is a room full of people who adore books, who devour them. Put your hand up if you've read more than 5 books this year. More than 25? More than 50? More than 75? More than 100? Anyone still with their hand up? They're the people to get a book recommendation. Oh, how many? 197, my goodness. That is amazing. Well, everyone, this lady down here, she's the person to come to for book recommendations. And I should say as well, this room, as you probably have just noticed, is full of people who share your love of reading. Many of you have come alone today. Please do not leave without saying hello to someone, without connecting with someone. You're all fans of these 2 extraordinary women, so there is so much for you to talk about. So please say hi to someone before you go. I promise you, you will regret it if you don't. Okay, so just a couple of notes before I introduce our speakers. Please post about the event. We would be so grateful. It really helps us at Trouble. Please tag us. Please tag our amazing speakers. That would be really, really helpful. And also, for the questions, we have Slido. I'll be coming on to read those out, so please do pop them in the Slido, and that should be on the stage. Yep, and it's on the screen now. So use that link, and we'll do the Slido at the end, because I'm sure you all have a lot of questions. Now, Trouble, without further ado, I am ecstatic to introduce tonight's guests. When we found out that Margaret Atwood was going to be in the UK, we knew we had to get her back, but we thought, what if she was joined on stage by another absolutely phenomenal author, someone whose work overlaps with Margaret's so much? We could think of no one better than Elif Shafak. It's impossible to give short introductions for these 2 women, so strap in. Margaret Atwood is the author of more than 50 books of fiction, poetry, and critical essays. Her most recent record-breaking novel, The Testaments, sequel to her 1985 classic, The Handmaid's Tale. Has anybody read it? Maybe 1 or 2, won the 2019 Booker Prize. Her work includes the Giller and Booker Prize shortlisted Oryx and Crake, as well as Alias Grace, The Robber Bride, Cat's Eye, then Booker winner The Blind Assassin. With the recent final season of the TV adaptation of The Handmaid's Tale, Atwood's prescient prose depicting a dystopian future are more relevant than ever. In October 2019, Atwood was presented with the Companion of Honor Award by Queen Elizabeth II, making her only the 3rd Canadian to receive the distinction. Elif Shafak is an award-winning British-Turkish novelist and storyteller. She has published 21 books, 13 of which are novels, and her books have been translated into 58 languages. The Island of Missing Trees was a finalist for the Costa Award, British Book Awards, and Women's Prize for Fiction. 10 minutes and 38 seconds in This Strange World was shortlisted for the Booker Prize and was Blackwell's Book of the Year. There Are Rivers in the Sky, which won an Edward Stanford Award for Fiction, is her latest novel. Combined, these 2 authors have written 71 books, and I think I can speak on behalf of all of us when I say the world is a vastly richer place for it. Please put your hands together for Margaret Atwood and Elif Shafak.
Thank you so much. It's such a treat for the mind, for the soul, to share the same stage with you, Margaret. I'm very excited. I'm very honored. I also want to thank everyone who's joining us tonight. To be honest, we don't take this for granted. You know, at a time like this, in a world like this, the fact that we're coming together, this gathering of minds and hearts, is very precious for us. So thank you for being with us. If that's okay with you, but first of all, I need to tell you how much I loved and I adored your memoir. It accompanied me on so many days, so many journeys. But if that's okay with you, I want to start with childhood, where many things start. Not everything, but many things. And I'd love it if you could tell us about your, because your childhood is so unusual, so remarkable. And if I may share this, there's a lovely little dialogue at the very beginning of the book. Your mother says you were always a sensitive child. And as a response, you tell her, well, I'm quite flinty now. And she says, yes, indeed you are. But, of course, the mighty person and writer you are today. But we won't start with that. We will start with the sentimental child, if that's okay. I would love it if you could take us back there.
Well, now, first of all, it's a pleasure to be on stage with you again.
Yes.
I think I last saw you in Hey on Y, and we did something together at that time. And you looked just as good as you did then. Ah, yes, my unusual childhood. It wasn't that unusual in Canada of those days. But let me situate you in time and space, where I like to situate everyone, because we all come from somewhere and we're all a certain age. So I was born in 1939, 2 months after the onset of World War II, which was a shaping force in my childhood and life. But I was born in Ottawa, see map, the second coldest world capital, the first coldest being Ulaanbaatar. I think it's gotten a bit warmer since those times, but lots of cold, lots of snow. My father was a forest entomologist, which meant that he studied insect infestations in the woods. So up we went into the woods in April when the lake was still frozen and everything was covered with snow. And from then on, for the next 5 or 6 years, we were there in the northwestern part of Quebec, see map. Up the Ottawa River, north of a town called Temiskaming, see map. Which was a logging town. And we were in the woods. We had no road, we had no electricity, we had no flush toilets, we had wood-burning stoves, 2 of them, and lighting was by kerosene lanterns. So growing up there, no movies, no television, nobody had it anyway, hardly any radio, and no theaters, no school.
You were homeschooled, yeah, until you were 12
yeah,
years
they have that word now, homeschool. We just called it doing the lessons, and if you did them really fast, you could go outside. So it made me a superficial person. Yeah, so that's what it was, and we would stay up there until things started to freeze and snow, and then we would go back to Ottawa because insects do nothing in the winter. Yeah, then my dad would write up his research, and so it went. And people find this unusual. This was a long time ago. It was at the moment when most people living in Canada were still pretty rural. And the the influx into cities was beginning, but was not complete. So what else can I tell you about it, except in Ottawa we had the radio, and I remember bong, 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 bong. This is London calling North America. Here is the BBC News. And we heard Winston Churchill, and also a lot of songs that very few in the audience will now remember. You want a selection?
Definitely.
Don't sit under the apple tree with anybody else but me. No, 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 etc.
Beautiful.
She wasn't expecting that.
No. I think, as I was reading those early chapters in the book, I thought about my own childhood. Mine was very, very urban compared to yours. But I think there was also this sense of displacement. I was born in France, and so the early years were in Strasbourg. But afterwards, my parents got separated, and my father stayed in France. Mm-hmm. I grew up without seeing him for a very long time, and I met my half-brothers much later. One of them came to my book signing in my mid-20s. That's how we met. So there was this absence from my paternal side. But in the meantime, I came to Turkey with my mother, and I was raised by my grandmother. This was a very matriarchal house in a very patriarchal society. Yeah. And I think those two women have shaped me in so many ways. So I was always looking for grandmothers in your memoir.
Here I am.
Yeah. I was looking for your paternal grandmother's attic, which was full of treasures. You talk about that, and you say your mind is like that. But there's something I want to ask you. I'm so curious. It's probably there's a witch in your family line, right? I would love it if you could tell us a little bit about that. I was so curious. Half-hanged Mary, and there's a story why she's half-hanged.
Yes.
That is remarkable.
So, going back in time to the 17th century, that is when this band of lunatics went to America and founded the 13 colonies. And beginning in Cape Cod, sea map, it sticks out into the Atlantic Ocean, and that's where the paternal side of my family was. They even have a museum there called the Atwood Museum. It's the house of one of two brothers. One stayed in Cape Cod, the second one went to Nova Scotia, which then became Canada eventually. And my sister and I recently went to that museum, and I think there are two favorite things about it. One was an Atwood ancestor who was a dentist, and he had had his portrait painted. And with the picture of himself looking extremely respectable, he had set on the table in front of him 3 sets of false teeth. He was evidently quite proud of them. And the other odd thing about it was they had a little door under the stairs, and they would put the cat through it every night so it could catch mice under the floor. What else it did under the floor, we hesitate to think. And then they would let it out again in the morning. So that was the father's side, dating from the 17th century. Also from the 17th, the Webster family, which included Governor John Webster of Connecticut, and eventually gave rise to Noah Webster of the dictionary, and Daniel Webster, the shady lawyer. But in this family, there was a woman called Mary Webster. My grandmother's name was Webster, one of them. And Mary, luckily before the Salem witchcraft mania, in which if you got accused, you were going to be found guilty no matter what. But just before that, she got accused of witchcraft in a town called Hadley, Massachusetts. She was accused of making an old man extremely valetudinarious, which meant making an old man old. And I'm sure we've all been guilty of that. That's how they get that way. Yeah. So she was carted off to Boston, put on trial, and exonerated. So she went back to her hometown, but the townspeople were not satisfied with the verdict, so they strung her up. It's an American thing. Sorry, it's a joke. They hadn't yet invented the drop, which broke your neck. So they just kind of hauled you up like a flag, and they left her dangling there all night. They came in the morning to cut down the body, and she was still alive. That's why she's called half-hanged Mary. So on Mondays, our grandmother would say she was an ancestor. And on Wednesdays, when she was feeling more respectable, she would say, maybe not. So we're not sure. But I wrote a suite of poems called Half-Hanged Mary, because that was her nickname once she got half-hanged.
Yeah.
That's that story.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. So this was before the Salem trials.
Just before.
Yeah. Had it been at the time, it could have been a different.
If she'd waited 10 years, it could have been her.
Indeed, indeed.
But needless to say, I'm very interested in that incident in American history, which involved trials.
Yeah.
We were not without juries and judges, but the two kinds of evidence that they accepted that meant that anyone accused was condemned were spectral evidence. And spectral evidence was if you were asleep in your bed, but somebody saw you 5 miles away doing weird things to your cow, that proved you were a witch, because you could cast your specter while you were asleep. And as you can see, there was no way of disproving that. You know, I was asleep in bed, I've got witnesses, didn't matter. The other one was touching. So if a teenage girl, and the accusers were teenage girls, I accuse you of being a witch, I touch you, I have a fit, that proves it. No way of disproving that either.
It's incredible. But of course, as I'm listening to you, I'm also thinking about, in a way, the era, the social, circumstances surrounding, framing everything that's happening.
Yes, well, usually these outbreaks of accusation and hysteria happen when something bad is happening.
Exactly.
And people want an explanation for it. Because they think if there's an explanation for it, they can get rid of whoever or whatever, and that will fix it.
Yeah.
So the bubonic plague, who was accused first? Lepers, because they traveled from place to place. So obviously they were poisoning the wells. They ran out of lepers. Next were Jews, traveling from place to place, obviously poisoning the wells. Got rid of them. The plague was still going on. Who could it be? It must be witches.
Yeah.
So they were flying through the air in an invisible form. And there was no way that you could prove that you weren't doing it.
I mean, we will talk about the backlash against women's rights, but I think in some ways, this story is not over. We're still that instinct, particularly when the world feels topsy-turvy, when there's so much uncertainty.
It must be somebody's fault.
Yeah, it must be somebody's fault. And if we can find that somebody, things will get better. Who is that somebody? Usually it's the foreigner or the immigrant or some minority. relatively vulnerable group that we can point fingers at.
And
that has not
you're
changed.
saying that right now in the United States. And it always involves holding out a utopian future,
Yeah.
if only we can get rid of those people. And there's always those people.
It's always those people, absolutely. I was thinking also, about the traditions that I grew up with. In the Middle East and the Levant, I would say, we don't have this much emphasis on witches and vampires, but we have a whole other narrative about jinn. So I grew up with these stories about spirits, and the jinn are interesting in this narrative. They're very complex. In English, we use only one word. But the jinn in Middle Eastern mythologies and narratives, there are good jinn, there are bad jinn, and then there are the undecided ones. Oh. They haven't quite made up their minds yet, Right. So they're made of smokeless fire. So I grew up with these stories that my grandmother would say. But the reason why I mention this is because part of her narrative, part of her stories, and maybe I should tell you right away also, that my grandmother was not a very well-educated woman, only because she had been pulled out of school in Turkey for being a girl at the time. And she wholeheartedly believed in women's education. And that really changed my mother's life and therefore my life. So a part of me maybe saw from a young age onwards when and if women support each other, particularly at those critical turning points, the impact of that goes beyond generations. She also showed me by her very existence that, you might not have a very fancy diploma from a very well-known school on the wall, but you can still be a wise human being. Or quite the opposite, you can graduate from a very posh, very well-known college, but you can still be ignorant in life, right? There are different paths to knowledge and wisdom, and I think it's thanks to her that I was able to maybe feel connected to the oral culture, oral storytelling, of the Balkans, of Asia Minor, of the Middle East. These are things that stayed with me. And I want to come to stories of nature, because in that world, water would have a voice. Nothing was too insignificant. And that's why I'm so intrigued also, both by your storytelling and your childhood, because from an early age onwards, you pay so much attention to every little detail in nature. And I wonder, growing up with a biologist's father also made you more appreciative of even the seemingly small things in nature, like, people would call bugs, not bugs. Insects are amazing. It's a whole universe. I wonder if that was the beginning.
Well, it was certainly formative, because we weren't allowed just to say tree.
Indeed.
It was this tree or that tree. Yeah. And it is true, by the way, that if there were no small life forms, particularly ants, we wouldn't be alive, because the soil would be untilled, unaerated, and just hard. It's the insects that keep it going, and the organisms that cause dead matter to decay and become integrated. You know that when the Australians imported cows, they forgot to import dung beetles. And that meant that the place started getting paved over with cow flaps, as we call them in Canada, that became hard in the sun, and then things couldn't grow. So they had to import dung beetles to break down these cow flaps and integrate them into the soil. I'm just throwing that out as something you would like to know, in case you have a garden. Yeah, so all of this, my father was very instructive, so we learned a lot about those things. And my brother was older than me and extremely curious. And we would go through the forest turning over dead logs to see what was underneath. Would you like to know what was underneath? Okay, mostly it was worms. But if you were lucky, it might be a snake. And if you were really lucky, it might be a salamander. Those were very attractive. So yes, we did a lot of those kinds of things. And I once had a boss at one of the jobs I had who wrote me afterwards and said, and she'd been reading my books, she said, were you nearsighted as a child? And I said, yes, I was, but it wasn't discovered for a while. And she said, I thought so, because there's a lot of very up-close detail in your books. Well, I could see, you know, ants very clearly. And do you know what an antlion is? All right, so antlions, you usually find them in sandy areas. They dig a funnel-shaped hole in the sand, and they bury themselves at the bottom of it, and they have sharp pincers, okay? And an ant comes along and starts to slide down this incline, and the antlion will actually throw small pebbles at it to make it slide down further. And when it gets to the bottom, it is seized, pulled underneath the sand, and devoured. Isn't that interesting?
I am nodding because I'm also thinking about my previous novel. It's called The Island of Missing Trees. I wrote about the island of Cyprus. As you know, it's a very divided island, beautiful island with beautiful people, north and south. But there's a partition line, and still there, as we're speaking, the wounds are very, very fresh. And depending on whom you talk to, there are clashing memories. So it's a very delicate story, and the partition line literally is drawn along ethnic, national, and religious lines, almost in the sense that it separates the majority Muslim population from a majority Christian population, majority Turkish Cypriot from a majority Greek Cypriot population. So I didn't know how to approach such a sensitive subject without myself, you know, as a storyteller, falling into the trap of tribalism, nationalism, and reproducing more of the same us versus them. We've had enough of that. And it was a fig tree that allowed me to approach this subject from a completely different angle. And so while I was writing that book, I did a lot of research about mosquitoes, about insects. I wish you had seen my agent's face when I told him, you know, I'm going to write a book and there's going to be a tree in the middle, at the heart of this book, and this tree is going to speak. And for a flicker, you know, for a moment, I saw this panic in his eyes. It came and it went, but I really understand, because for a writer, it's a risk. If you take such a risk, if it doesn't work, the entire structure collapses. But I really believed in this voice of the fig tree, and that kept me going, that guided me. So I'm a big believer in writers, also those of us who don't have the experience that you've had, you know, from childhood, to leave our comfort zones and study water science, study biology, study neuroscience, just going into other areas and keeping our reading lists more eclectic. So I find that your work so nourishing. Would you like to tell us, Margaret, what kind of an experience was it writing this book, a memoir? You say you had to do a lot of sifting through lots of images. You call it the hoard of, you know, your father's archives, your mother's archives, and sometimes Kodak snapshots. What kind of an experience was it? You had to go back in time, sometimes remember the good and the bad, not only visually, but emotionally as well.
Well, what is a memoir? So it's not a biography. That would be somebody else doing the definitive, researched, footnoted, exhaustive, somewhat boring, possibly, story of all sorts of things in your life that you may have forgotten about. It's not an autobiography, which would be somewhat similar, only you doing it. But a memoir is what you remember. And the kinds of things you remember are not necessarily chronologically exhaustive. They are stupid things you did, stupid things other people did, usually more of those. Bad things people did to you, bad things you did to other people, fewer of those, naturally. And high points, especially surprising high points, times when you were actually not expecting this good thing, and near-death experiences, catastrophes, and unusual people you've known. And all of it takes place in time and space, which is your time and space. And every character in a book has a time and space, and every person on Earth has a time and space, which is different from those of other people. So that's a memoir. It's what you remember in a setting. And of course, you remember the setting, and you remember your setting very well. It always surprises me to run into people who say, well, I don't remember much before I was 15. How could you not? It's such an important part of your life. So yes, I do remember in rather exhaustive detail quite a lot of my early life. The odd thing is that as you get older, you remember less of what has just happened.
Yeah.
Like, what did I do last week? Search me. But what did I do in 1953? Chapter and verse.
Yeah. Absolutely. And also, because you're a Scorpio, I am a Scorpio.
Yes, we're
Not
very...
that we believe in horoscope. We are skeptical.
Yes, we're very nice, really. but don't start. That's why you're so interested in the witches.
It's these grudges that we hold, right, in the long run. Yeah, we remember. We don't forget. Yeah.
Yes, unfortunately, we hold grudges, but it's okay if you haven't done anything bad.
Yes. I'm also very interested. I'm skipping, a few years very fast, but I'm very interested in your university years. The bohemian, almost underground that you describe in Canada at the time. I was very amazed, surprised to read that. And in a way, you say at the time, the heart of literature was there, that underground culture. In many ways, it reminded me of Istanbul, but I would love it if you could tell us a little bit about that.
All right, I'm taking you back to Canada in 1960. A time and place you remember well, of course. So there wasn't much visible literary life. I counted. In fact, there was a journal that published every summer reviews of all of the novels published by Canadians and Canadian publishers in that year. And in that year, I think it was 61, there were 5 for the whole year. And poetry more, because poetry was small and cheap, and you could do it in your cellar. And a lot of us did, and they reviewed those too. These would be editions of 200 or 300. Some of them might have been made on a Mimeo machine, archaic device. You turned the handle, purple things came out, you stapled them together. Some of them were hand set. I hand set my own first little book. You have to set it backwards. And some of them, offset printing had just been developed, so some of them were like that. So they were read mainly by other poets, and there was a subculture of other poets, with a few visible ones sticking up above the sea level. One of those was Leonard Cohen. He began as a poet. So not much visible literary life going on in 1960, but a lot of underground life. The Bohemian Embassy was what we called a coffee house, which meant you brought your alcoholic liquor in a paper bag and, and had a coffee. We had the first espresso machine anybody had ever seen. Whoa. Yes, it made a noise. Like that. And that would always happen when you were reading your deathless poem to the audience, which was sitting at little cafe tables with checkered tablecloths on them and candles in Chianti bottles. And this was a mixture of poets, some of them less reputable than others. In fact, in those days, it was before creative writing programs at universities, it was quite disreputable to be a poet. The poets knew one another, the novelists didn't, and anyway, there weren't very many of them, and they were widely spaced. Canada's very big, see map. I'd like to amuse the English by saying you could take England and drop it into Lake Superior. Not that anybody wishes to. Not with Scotland, though, just England. So yes, it's very big, and in those days before the internet and when phone calls were very expensive, the novelists just didn't know each other, such as they were. So that was the beginning of the literary life in the 60s. In 1960, it was like that. By 1970, we had started new publishing companies. We had a presence. Novels had started being published in greater numbers, and there was a reading audience. The problem before that time wasn't that people didn't read. They read, but they read imported books. So real books came from the United States or England or France, if you were Francophone. And it was our generation that created an infrastructure for publishing Canadian books in Canada. I call that the first uprising of Canadian hooray, hooray. The second was an argument over free trade with the United States, and we're having the third one right now. It's called elbows up. It's a hockey term, and it means if somebody crowds you into the corner, you put your elbow up, and hopefully their teeth fall out. So yeah, it's very elbows up in Canada right now. It's more united than I've seen it for quite some time because of the threat of annexation coming from you-know-where by you-know-who. And no, we do not wish to be the 51st state. Thank you very much. And anyway, it wouldn't be the 51st, it would be 10 other states, and the Republicans would never get elected again.
Yeah.
So if I were them, I wouldn't do it. Yeah, it's also really quite large. And we know the technique of the Russians when Napoleon invaded Russia, don't we? You retreat into the hinterland more and more, and then you cut their supply lines. And because they don't know about the weather, they haven't brought their winter underwear. I tell you nothing but the truth.
But it's, I mean, fascinating. I think those of us who are old enough, we remember there was a time of such optimism, late 1990s. Back then, I think that the biggest optimists were the tech optimists. They would tell us that if you spread information, everyone was going to become informed citizens. Informed citizens were going to make informed choices. This was the triumph of liberal democracy. From now onwards, there couldn't be authoritarianism. Those were the predictions back then in 1990s.
Yeah.
And I remember there was such faith in digital platforms. So the young Egyptian couple at the very beginning of the Arab Spring, of course with all good intentions, they named their newborn baby daughter Facebook. I think about Facebook a lot, you know. What kind of a world have we given her? She's a teenager now, and back then it was an age of optimism. Now the pendulum has swung the opposite end, and it's an age of pessimism, angst, anxiety. There's a very, I think, existential anxiety that cuts deep right now, young and old, east and west. Maybe the only difference is some people hide their emotions more than others. But that's the only thing. And back then, they used to tell us that, you know, if you come from those countries over there, the liquid countries, like where I come from, of course you will worry about women's rights. Of course you will worry about human rights or freedom of speech or the future of democracy, but not in the solid countries. So the West was the solid land, right? The solid, steady, safe. All these values, all these rights had been already achieved in the West, and you didn't have to worry about these things. And fast forward where we are right now, we do know that there's no such thing as solid countries versus liquid countries. There are only liquid times. We're all going through liquid times. What is happening in one country can happen elsewhere. And so if we can come to the Handmaid's Tale, I mean, what you have done at the time, of course, it was unthinkable, the world that you depicted in your wonderful novel, but less and less it became less and less unthinkable, and here we are right now. Shall we talk a little bit about the Handmaid's journey?
And why not? Yes, so the year is 1984. How corny of me to start a dystopic novel like that in 1984.
1984. Yeah.
Of course, I had read 1984 as a young teenager and been very impressed by it. And just today, I was at Broadcasting House and I got a picture of myself with George Orwell. There's a statue of him, ironically in the smoking corner.
True.
He shouldn't have done that. Yeah, so I was very interested in that book and in the golden age of sci-fi, which was the 50s. We had Ray Bradbury, we had Fahrenheit 451, and a number of other seminal works of science fiction in that decade, which was, of course, during the Cold War. Yeah. So I was pretty interested in the Cold War. I was very interested in how totalitarianisms get going and how they impose themselves and eventually how they crumble from within, because that does happen. And because I studied 17th century American history and literature, I'm here to tell you that the Puritan colonies in New England were not democracies. They were theocracies. So writing The Handmaid's Tale, I started thinking about it when guess who got elected in the States? It was Ronald Reagan. And at that time, there started to be a backlash against the rights that women had achieved in the 1970s, such as the right to have a credit card. Imagine that. Jobs, credit cards, your own money, all those things. They're starting to be pushed back. We saw the rise of the so-called religious right as a political force. It started happening then, and they were already saying then what they thought they would like to do should they have power. And I always believe people when they say what they would like to do should they have power. I never think, oh, that's just talk, oh, that's just something to get them elected. I never think that. I think they'll do it if they can. So then I said to myself, if what they're saying is women should all be put back into the home, how are you going to get them there? Because now they're all running around like ants with their credit cards and jobs and money and things, having apartments of their own and all of these bad things, how will you get them back into the home? And the obvious answer is you just cut off any other possibility so that there's no other place for them to be. And as for and these things are always hierarchical, they're always pyramid-shaped. Powerful people at the top descending down to the bottom. And in an age of declining birth rates, and they were already declining then, much more now, and the fertility rate is going down. So women capable of bearing children would be rare and valuable, and naturally those at the top would have more of them. Return to the Ottoman Empire with lots of women for those at the top, and down at the bottom not so lush. So those were some of the models. And I was also thinking of Ceausescu in Romania, who mandated 4 children per woman. And if you somehow failed to get pregnant in any given month, you had to say why. That's impossible. Of course, as in the Bible, it was on the woman, right? It was never some guy who didn't have a high sperm count. It was no, we couldn't talk about that. So yes, out of all of these pieces of background information and many more, I created The Handmaid's Tale, and I placed it in the heart of liberal democratic America, namely Harvard University, because I've never believed the sentence, "It can't happen here."
Yeah.
I've never believed that, and neither have you.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing all across the world, of course, what we have experienced over the last many years is democracy is much more fragile than we initially assumed. It's a very delicate ecosystem, and when and if countries go backwards, I think the very first rights that will be taken away will be women's rights and minority rights. So it's
This goes back to Rousseau and the French Revolution. Sorry to be so stuck on the French Revolution as I am right now, but it is the first modern revolution, first one with an urban mob. And Rousseau was a huge influence on Robespierre, so we get liberty, equality, and fraternity, but not sorority.
Yeah.
And the woman who had the impudence, and it was called impudence, to write the Declaration of the Rights of Women and of the Female Citizen, Olympe de Gouges, got her head chopped off. So just dandy equality and fraternity and liberty for men, not so much women. Back into the home, and lots of breastfeeding.
That's why it's a crucial moment for global solidarity, and I think global sisterhood as well. We have very little time left, but I want to talk maybe lastly about optimism and pessimism. Sometimes, jokingly, I think to myself, I can't be a very optimistic person. I'm Turkish, it's not in my DNA, If you open a map of Europe, and if you look at this beautiful river Danube, if you trace it with your finger, as the river flows eastwards, the level of optimism drops and drops and drops. So by the time you reach, my part of the world, you come to Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, the Black Sea, Turkey, we're not very optimistic people. And I think it's okay for the mind to be a little bit pessimistic so long as we can keep the hope alive. Right? How do we keep hope alive? This is why I think this conversation is so important. You're more optimistic than me, but I would love it if we can maybe close on that note about hope, and where do we find pockets of hope in a world like this?
Well, let's make a distinction between optimism and hope,
True.
Which was made recently by Rachel Maddow.
True.
Who was in Toronto giving us a talk with Rebecca Solnit, one of the writers on Orwell. How did we lure them there? Never mind. They were terrific. And they talked about this, and they said, optimism is thinking that everything's just going to be fine, and you don't have to do anything to make it be fine. It will just all work out. And hope is the feeling that things could be better, but you're going to have to work at it. So I think that's hope, and I'm in favor of it. I've never been optimistic in that other way. I don't believe that history is inevitably leading to the Emerald City of Oz. I don't believe we're on a golden inevitable road and it's all just going to be fine. And I know that the word revolution does not mean equality for everyone and chicken in every pot. It just means that the wheel of fate turns, and those on the bottom move to the top, those on the top get thrown off and get crushed underneath the wheel of fate, which is a very old motif. Goes back at least to the goddess Fortuna in the Roman Empire, and is the first song in Karl Orff's Carmina Burana. Oh, Fortuna, boom. Fickle as the moon, yes.
Indeed.
So I don't believe in inevitable progress. I don't believe in the right side of history. I don't think history has got sides. It has incidents, it has ups and downs, but there is no inevitable right side of it to be on.
Yeah.
And I also think that those in the middle have the most to defend, because they're being attacked from both extremes. And by the way, you can have a totalitarianism of the right and also one of the left, which we have seen time and time again.
Yeah.
And what is it really about? It's about power.
Yeah.
And who has the power, who wants the power, who wants to hold on to the power, and who will really do anything to make that happen. How about that? Is that optimistic? But every once in a while, the wheel turns, and for a while anyway, there's an opening.
We want to believe that history is linear. We want to, in general, as human beings, want to believe that tomorrow is going to be more progressive, more developed than yesterday. But that's an illusion of the mind. There's no such guarantee. History is not necessarily a steady, progressive march. And I think the ancient Greeks, when they separated, when they talked about time, they didn't just use one word. They used chronos for the chronology time, which is now ticking. That is the time with which we measure minutes, hours, days. But then they also had kairos, which is the deep time. And when you focus on kairos, you notice the invisible, the patterns throughout history. Maybe they're not exactly the same, but the echoes. And I would like to hope and believe that the time of storytelling and storytellers is closer to kairos. We are interested in memory keeping, not because we want to be stuck in the past, but unless we understand, unless we study the past, we cannot repair. And what we cannot repair keeps coming back again and again. So hopefully we will finish on this note of kairos, storytelling time, and we're so looking forward to your questions and your comments.
And then you'll tell them more stories.
Yes, more stories, yes.
Yes, we must also be a little bit suspicious about the word story, which has been used especially by those nice grandmothers that you long for. You've been telling stories, meaning lies.
Yeah, we redefine that word. Indeed, indeed.
Oh, there I am. Before we go into questions, can we please give a round of applause to these two incredible... Thank you so much to you both, and thank you everyone for your incredible questions. I'm going to try and go for the most popular ones first. So the first one we have is for Margaret. To what extent do real-world issues inspire your other novels, like The Heart Goes Last or the Oryx and Crake trilogy, as you mentioned with The Handmaid's Tale?
To what extent do real-world issues inform my
The Heart Goes
novels?
Last or the Oryx and Crake trilogy?
Yes, quite a lot. Yes, because I have an older brother who reads all my books and gives me notes on them. So I knew that I had to get these science in Oryx and Crake right, or I was going to hear about it. So in creating this race of human beings who lack our imperfections and the things that get us into trouble, I do have them mate seasonally and in groups, like cats. And I have them turn, parts of them turn blue to indicate that they are in season, so there's never any mistakes. Like, no, I'm not interested. Oh, you're just flirting. None of that. They will never write Romeo and Juliet, but on the other hand, they seem to be quite happy. So my brother read this, and he said, he's a person of few words, he said, I thought you did pretty well on the sex. But and I'd given my people the ability to self-heal through purring. And he said, but I'm not so sure about the purring. However, science has since vindicated me. The frequency of cats purring is the same as the ultrasound used for bone healing. And we now know, and I'm telling you this for your own good, that if you put a purring cat on your head when you're having a migraine, it has a very curative effect. How do you keep it there? That's a different problem. I think it's the cat in the hat. Yeah, so yes, I have to research these things, or else I'm going to be in trouble with my brother, and you don't want that.
Thank you so much. I bet none of you were thinking you were going to hear about that tonight, but you lucky things. Okay, one for you both. You get asked a lot of questions. What do you wish you could ask readers?
Is that for you?
For both of you.
What we would like to ask our readers? That's really a tricky question, because when I say readers, I do not think of a homogeneous group of people. It always amazes me to see how different readers would read the same book in completely different ways. I've met couples who've been married for 45 years. They read the same novel. They don't read it in the same way. One of them loves it, the other one not so much. Or good friends who share everything, every little secret. They read the same book. They feel attached to different characters. Why? Because the reader is not passive. Every reader brings their own gaze into the story, and that's how we create meaning. They're unique, our readings, like our fingerprints. So I don't like to generalize, in my mind, what kind of readers are going to read this book. I know it's going to be a unique experience each and every time.
That is entirely correct. But I was once, in the days of The Robber Bride, which has a badly behaved central figure called Xenia, I was talking to a group of English women. So I asked them a question. I said, there's 4 characters in the book. I said, which was your favorite character? And they said that it was Xenia, the bad one. And I said, why is she your favorite? And this English woman said, because women are tired of being good all the time. Don't you think?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Hey, we're not called the Trouble Club for no reason, Okay. What is one of your lesser-known books that you feel was transformative in your journey and growth as a writer? One for you both as well.
What was transformative?
One of your lesser-known books. Less-known books, yeah.
That was transformative in my own. You mean ones that I wrote or ones that I read?
Ones that you wrote.
Ones that I wrote. Did I ever get transformed? I guess that's the question.
It's difficult.
Okay, so the ones that were transformative were ones that didn't work out. Yeah. Learn through failure. Yes, so I learned a couple of things from the ones that didn't work out, 2 in number. The first one I intended to be organized, more organized than I was. And this time I was going to not just sort of plunge in and improvise, I was going to have it planned out. So I got some filing cards, and I was going to have 8 characters, each with a different color of filing card. And I was going to have 5 sections, and each of the characters was going to have a chapter within each of these 5 sections, making a total of 40. I should have known right away that that was a mistake, because 4 is an unlucky number. So I started with this scheme, and I got through it twice, and I knew what they had for breakfast, what was in their sock drawer, what their mothers were like. I knew all of these things. I had 200 pages, and nothing had happened. So, and I realized that being organized was not for me. And the second one that didn't work out, I had too many time levels. So even I got confused as to what was happening when. So I think structure is very important, and it is usually the thing that fouls you up when you haven't got it right. And the other thing that's very important is voice and tense. So helpful hint, pay attention to the structure, and if you're having trouble, change the voice from the first to the third, or from the third to the first, and change the tense from the past pluperfect, always a difficult tense, to the simple past, or even the present.
I think in my case, I tend to believe that everything we write, everything we erase, they feed each other, you know, it accumulates. So my less well-known books will be my first novels, which were written in Turkish first. As you can hear in my accent, I am not a native speaker. English is not my mother tongue. This is an acquired language for me. And I wrote my first novels in Turkish, and then about 20 years ago, if not more, I switched. And that was a very difficult experience for me. Some novelists are very plot-driven, others are very character-driven, but then there are some novelists who adore language, just like poets. I'm in that group. So for me, someone like me to abandon my mother tongue, it felt like cutting off my hand and have to recreate, refine my voice. But I needed that. You know, being a Turkish writer, a novelist in Turkey is a heavy experience. Whatever you write about, from sexuality to gender to politics to history, you offend the authorities. In a night, you know, in a day, you find yourself in trouble, prosecuted, sued, exiled, sometimes imprisoned, and so on. So there's always that knowledge at the back of our minds, which is difficult. We didn't get a chance to talk about censorship, but I think it's an important concept. So somehow writing in English gave me another space and a bit of cognitive distance. It's like when you want to see a painting more closely, you don't take a step forward, you take a step back. And putting that cognitive distance maybe helped me to take a closer look at where I come from. So I would say those earlier novels, maybe not many people know them outside of Turkey, but they definitely shaped me very, very deeply.
Wow, we'll all be looking them up after this, learning Turkish, just for the honor. Elif, you mentioned censorship, and we have a question here that says, what is the role of a writer in a world where truth itself becomes the battleground?
What was that?
I think it's so unfortunate that the English language, I don't know if you would agree with me, but we use the word fiction as if it were the opposite of fact, right? And we think if we want to escape the reality, the real world, some people think then we should read novels. I strongly disagree. I think fiction is very interested in truth, and it brings us closer to truth, but it does it in its own gentle and profound way. Anything that is part of life is inside a novel. So I feel very sad personally when I hear some readers with good intentions, but they say so much is happening in the world. You know, I want to understand, so I read about important things, finance and economy and history. But then they say, you know, my wife reads fiction, my girlfriend reads fiction. That duality needs to be dismantled. Inside fiction, there is everything, and perhaps more importantly, there's emotional intelligence. I don't know a single human being in this world who doesn't need to connect with their emotional intelligence.
I think, and neurologists will bear me out, that reading a literary work of fiction is the closest that you can come to being inside the mind of another human being. And it's also the closest you can come to actually having those experiences yourself, that is neurologically. So more neurons are active when you are reading a work of fiction than when you're seeing a movie, than when you're seeing a television series, because you are the set designer, you are the person who decides what Mr. Darcy looks like, and he does not come out of a lake wearing a wet shirt in the novel. That would be something if he had. Yeah, so you are, as it were, the director of your own movie, and you are also the player of the music. So the music on the page is the same for everybody, but each performer plays it differently. And that is what reading is. You are the musician of the text.
Awesome. Thank you so much, both. Okay, we have two, I suppose, similar questions from people of different point of view. The first one, life is long. What is a piece of advice you'd give someone who feels incredibly lost and turns to books for the answer?
Incredibly lost, and then what?
Turns to books for the answer.
Turns to books for an answer.
Oh, turns to books. Good choice.
I think
I have met people who have said books saved my life, literally. And I've met other people, usually from pretty small towns in the United States, who say, books got me out of this. So yes, they can be a pathway. They can be a pathway out. They can be a means of connection. And they can certainly be a means of connection with other people if you run into others who actually like reading them. I have had young men say to me, thank you very much. I used your books to impress my girlfriend. So there's that too. Read books, impress your girlfriend.
I think as human beings, we are, all of us, we're storytelling creatures, aren't we? Not only that, we are story-remembering creatures. There are such interesting studies that show when we go to a talk, you know, if the talk is given with PowerPoint and graphics and data, all those amazing visuals, we listen, but the next day, 24 hours later, we have forgotten more than 50% of the talk. And then 3 days later, more than 70% has evaporated. But if the same talk is given, conveyed with stories, with emotions, if the speaker shows us their own vulnerability, their own sentiments, then we remember, because we connect. So there's a very strong correlation between emotions, memory, and stories. And I think no one said it at the end of the day better than Maya Angelou said, right? She said, people might forget what you've said to them, people might even forget what you've done to them, but they will never ever forget how you made them feel. It's those feelings that stay, the hurt, the joy, the sorrow. So how, for a reader who feels lost in this world, I really would recommend reading more fiction. It's only when we read fiction we leave our own little cocoons, our own little corners of the universe, because we're all born into one identity, one box, and we live in an age in which we're constantly being told that we must remain in those boxes once and for all. But when we read a story, we journey into someone else's psyche, and we look at the world from that perspective. It's an incredibly humbling exercise for the mind and for the spirit. I think it's a very transcendental thing. We always talk about the autobiographical nature of literature, but I think there's a transcendental nature as well. So all I can say is to read more stories, to keep the curiosity of the mind alive at a time like this seems very important to me.
And now from the other side, from the younger generations, Regan has written, hi Regan, shout if you can hear me. Oh, you're too nervous, that's okay. I'm 15 and likely the youngest person here. What advice would you give me and other young women in a world trying to take our basic rights away and silence us?
Whoa. Is that happening here too? Okay, move to Canada. We're okay at the moment. And one reason for having Canada not be the 51st state is that I need Canada in my fiction as a place where people can escape to. Yes, I think it's a growing problem, and it's one of the things, and you've already said this, it's one of the first things authoritarians and totalitarians do. They suppress women. And that has been going on for a very long time. So what should you do? I think you're going to have to look at you still live in a democracy, by the way. You're going to have to look at what your local politicians are saying and proposing. And if they're saying and proposing some of these stupid things that have happened in places like Texas, where it's worse for young women than it is in Gilead, because at least in Gilead they get 3 square meals a day, a roof over their head, and a nice outfit. Whereas in Texas, you get pregnant, you're on your own. And if you start bleeding out in a parking lot, too bad for you. So you have to look at what they're saying, and if they're saying those kinds of things, vote them out. That's one piece of advice. People who say they love babies and do nothing to actually help pregnant mothers and babies are just lying.
Well, I would want to thank the 15-year-old audience member. I really think it's a difficult age to be young. Definitely hard for young women, but I also think it's hard for young men as well. And as feminists, I find it very important that we engage in this conversation, particularly young men coming from disadvantaged backgrounds or who have no access to power, sources of authority. So we need to broaden up, expand, in my opinion, these conversations. I find it very important that we allow ourselves to fail sometimes. You know, I observe lots of immigrant families, again with good intentions. We put a lot of pressure on our youth, and there are many young people out there who feel like they cannot fail because they represent something bigger than themselves, a community, an identity. That's a lot of pressure, you know? It's already hard to be a young, and we learn a lot from our failures, so we need to allow each other to fail. An age in which the word loser is being, you know, used left and right, it makes me very sad to see that. And I think it's very important that we build connections. There's one emotion that really scares me in this age of angst, and that is the lack of all emotions, you know, apathy, numbness, when we become disconnected, when we become indifferent to each other's stories, to each other's sorrow. So how do we reconnect? I think on 3 levels, if we can build connections, that might help us forward. What I mean is, the first one is heart-to-heart, human-to-human connections beyond all borders and beyond all boxes. That to me feels very important, so that we don't become atomized individuals. And the second connection that I find very important is with nature. It really teaches us so much, just sitting under a tree, walking by a river, and observing nature and realizing that we're not above nature, we're not outside of nature, we're just a small part of a very delicate ecosystem. And the third reconnection that I find important is the inner one. I think we each have an inner garden that we're responsible for. I really don't know what to call that. Some people call it spirituality, other people call it meditation. I don't have a word for it. Voltaire called it inner garden, maybe I'm following him, but I think we need to take care also of our own inner gardens in a world as difficult and as challenging as this.
Dare we add, cut down on screen time?
We're going to go for 2 more questions. The penultimate question is, what were your favorite childhood books? And Margaret, was Anne of Gables one of your favorite childhood books?
What was the second question?
Childhood books.
Your favorite childhood book?
Favorite childhood book, and what was the second part?
And was Anne of Green Gables one of your favorites,
Gables.
Margaret?
Yeah.
Okay, Anne of Green Gables, the question. Okay, what was my favorite childhood book? Childhood is quite a long period of time. So at what age? Are we beginning at 3? Are we?
If you want to tell us your favorite book at 3, we'd love to hear it.
All right, I was very keen on Beatrix Potter, especially the gruesome ones in which the rabbit babies almost got turned into a pie, but that's just because I'm weird. As I advanced in age, I went through a number of different books, and let's say that at 11, I was very keen on Sherlock Holmes. A safe choice for a young girl, because he wasn't interested in women at all. Except for one con artist that he liked quite a lot. So the other part of the question is Anne of Green Gables. As a Canadian, we all girls read Anne of Green Gables. But my most interesting Anne of Green Gables moment was in Japan, when I asked a Japanese audience why the Japanese were so keen on Anne of Green Gables. I got 32 different answers. A nice lady wrote them all down, translated them, and sent them to me. And they ranged everywhere from red hair was exotic to, after the war, there were a lot of orphans, so people identified with orphans, to what you really wanted in Japan was to impress the respected older people, and Anne does that. To girls were not supposed to act out and have temper tantrums, so it was very invigorating to see Anne having them. To Anne likes apple blossoms, and they're very similar to cherry blossoms. So we identified with that. So a very fascinating list and a number of things you wouldn't have thought of. There is a musical of Anne of Green Gables that plays in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island. And when I went, it was filled with Japanese tourists who then went off and bought a lot of merch, including Anne of Green Gables hats with pretend red pigtails on them. And I thought, they're not going to understand the egg and spoon race. But I was wrong, because when Japanese people take up a hobby, they really take it up. They know everything about it. So it was totally known to them, and I needn't have worried. How about that?
So childhood books, in my case, I think the very beginning was my grandmother's house, and there weren't too many books there. There were only a limited number, and I would reread the same books over and over again, trying to imagine different endings. It was mostly oral stories at the time that kept my imagination alive, and then reimagining the endings of the existing books. One of those books was, I never forget, it was a very thick volume, Islamic Interpretation of Dreams. And it takes you straight into Borges territory, you know, you just how to interpret dreams. I remember being fascinated by that idea. But it was in Spain. I was a teenager, 11 years old. I had to learn Spanish very fast. Spanish became my second language, and then English. And that year I felt very lonely. I was a single child, now in Spain, trying to keep up. I was also an introvert, couldn't catch up with the other kids. And it was Don Quixote that really, really changed my world. It was a children's edition. I would color every page. Somehow, I mean, me coming from my maternal grandmother's universe from Turkey, but somehow this knight just cruising, roaming La Mancha with his squire, they felt so close to my heart. You know, I was journeying with them, I was out there with them. I love Don Quixote. I read it many times afterwards, but it also showed me the craft, the craftsmanship, you know, how you construct a novel. But I would definitely say Don Quixote is the book that changed me in so many ways.
Okay, final question is a big one. Settle the debate. Should books remain pristine, or do you crack the spine?
Well, now, do you fold down the corners of the pages? Yes, I do. Do you write little notes in the margins in pencil? Yes, I do. Yes, I like to feel, and I like to read books where other people have done that, because you're seeing somebody else's mind having gone through the book.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I did have a book that I inherited from my relatives of the 19th century, and some distant relative unknown had marked the recipe for black hair dye made out of walnuts. I'd love to know who that was.
I have a lot of respect for people who keep their books pristine and, you know, very clean, but I'm not one of them. I actually love it when books journey with us, and you can see when a reader brings a book that is tattered with coffee stains, wine stains. I like that. Also, where I come from in Turkey, I think a book is not only a personal item. You know, if a reader likes a book, they don't put it back on the shelf, they pass it on. So they give it to their neighbor, and the neighbor sends it to their son, and the son shares it with his fiancée, and so on. So on average, 5 to 6 people read the same copy. And I've seen many times at book signings, people, when they bring me copies of my books, they have been underlined by different colored pens because different people have read the same copy. And I love that. I cherish that word of mouth. And I honestly think if in an age like this, because it's the age of hyperinformation, short attention spans, it's an age of instant gratification, very fast consumption. If we're still reading novels, if we're still talking about novels, we really, really owe it to that word of mouth and readers sharing stories among them. So I would love that to continue.
Can we please give these two a final round of applause, and please make it a big one. Thank you so much to you all for coming. Thank you for asking such wonderful questions. If you do have a book signing ticket, and only a book signing ticket, sadly, please do wait at the front of the stage as we kind of churn the stage so we can get those done. But thank you all so very much for being here this evening. We are so grateful that you came, and hopefully we will see you at a Trouble event again very, very soon. Have a wonderful weekend.